Welcome to the Gems of Google Earth, a series where I uncover some of the most fascinating and oftentimes overlooked satellite images and the stories they tell. In this video, we're going to explore Russia and other former Soviet states. First on the list is the Aral Sea, which is a former body of water, if you could call it that, or current series of bodies of quasi-water. This was once a gigantic lake in Central Asia. However, by and large today, the term Aral Sea is rather a misnomer, as by and large this quote-unquote sea, which was actually a lake, has disappeared over the course of the 20th century. This is by and large due to water irrigation used for primarily cotton and other crops that were used to, well, feed the Soviet economy, or in this case, the state of Uzbekistan, as well as the state of Kazakhstan. The Soviet Union, by and large, was a top-down, centrally planned economy. And by and large, many of these Soviet states that were not part of Russia had to adhere to the whims of Moscow. Now, on face value, this sort of made sense. After all, cotton was a very significant industry at the time. However, by diverting water into other areas, this drained the sea, or really lake, and resulted in quite possibly one of the worst ecological catastrophes of the 20th century. On top of that, there is widespread pollution and toxicity around this area. And to this day, many people around this region in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have had to make up for the mess. And many of them are by and large subject to a variety of diseases and toxicities related to this former quote-unquote sea. Next on the list is Lake Baikal, which is an actual lake, and unlike the Aral Sea, which is neither a sea or a lake at this point, this one really stays true to its name. In fact, not only is it a lake, but it is quite possibly the most badass lake on the face of the planet, because it is extremely deep. In fact, it is so deep that it can go all the way down to well over 5,000 feet, or over 1,600 meters below sea level. That is just staggering. That is far deeper than Lake Superior. And it is also one of the largest lakes, both in terms of volume and surface area. And it's all in the middle of Siberia, a place that people by and large don't interact with. On top of that, the lake is very unique when it comes to wildlife. Now, generally speaking, lakes in the colder regions of the world, around the taiga forests of Siberia, would not be particularly renowned for their wildlife, but one particularly cool animal resides here, and that is a species of freshwater seals. Yes, you got it, freshwater seals that actually live here, that most likely migrated due to a series of interconnected lakes and water systems that allowed them to travel from saltwater bodies to freshwater bodies over the course of many generations. And over the course of millions of years, had eventually adapted from marine salinity into freshwater salinity. Next on the list is back in Central Asia, and that is this giant gas crater known as the Door to Hell. Now, contrary to popular belief, Satan does not reside in this gas corridor, nor is this giant pit of fire really that old. This is located, after all, in Turkmenistan, a relatively poor, corrupt nation in Central Asia, renowned for its, let's just say, eccentric dictatorship, that has nonetheless become famous for this really cool geological feature. The origin of this crater doesn't stem back millions of years ago, or even thousands or hundreds of years ago, but back to 1971, around the same time that Queen was touring the world. The Soviets had drilled so far that they had hit an underground cavern filled with natural gas. And lo and behold, this natural gas is still on fire, spreading methane, which I'm sure is fantastic for the environment, and even more fantastic for the tourists who want to see its never-ending flame. Next on the list is not as obscure. This is Chernobyl, or more accurately, the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Now, I'm assuming almost all of you have heard of Chernobyl on some level. This was a nuclear power plant in what is now Ukraine, in what was then the Soviet Union. And during the mid-1980s, there was a massive nuclear disaster, which led to the evacuation of humans of this town. You can even see this cute little abandoned Ferris wheel. Nonetheless, what happened in the aftermath wasn't as cute, but it did get better, as the removal of humans led to a sort of wildlife sanctuary, where wolves, deer, and other wildlife in this temperate region had eventually remade this area their home, despite the radiation. After all, deer are pretty stupid, and an animal that is too stupid to move away from a moving car is probably not smart enough to think, hey, why don't I not live in this area filled with nuclear reactivity? It is still quite dangerous to live here, even for wildlife. However, we haven't seen anything on par with the sort of corrupted bears that you'd see in Fellwood in World of Warcraft. Next on the list is less depressing. The Arini 1 cave, which I'm mispronouncing. This is located in Armenia. Now, whether or not Armenia is considered to be part of Europe is debatable, but it was once part of the Soviet Union and has had a profound importance in the history of Christianity. So I'm going to include it on this list. Now, wine is an ancient drink. It is, in fact, one of the oldest drinks in the world. And this cave is the location of what is arguably the oldest winery in the world, created in this limestone gorge, next to a river. By and large, this climate was pretty conducive to growing grapes, and after grapes ferment, you can drink them and get drunk, and most likely due to this accidental malfeasance, people realized, hey, it's fun to drink wine. It's fun to get drunk. And lo and behold, the over 6,000-year-old history of wine was birthed. Now, to be clear, there are other areas that have been known for wine production that may have been older, but this is the oldest one that we know for sure. On top of that, we see some elements of mass production and logistics here, with large clay jars. Now, 98% of my audience is male, but if there are any women here, particularly wine ants, you have this place to thank for your drinking habits. Let's stick to the Caucasus region. Putin's Palace. Now, this is located on the Black Sea and is known as the very extravagant residence of Vladimir Putin. After all, this region is one of the warmest in Russia, and by and large, people like to live in warm areas rather than places where they freeze their asses off. And lo and behold, Putin, being arguably the richest man in the world, given that he has billions upon billions of dollars from money he has extracted from the Russian state, has this area as one of his primary residence, which is quite interesting given its relatively close proximity to the ongoing war in Ukraine and the war specifically in the Black Sea. Putting theaters of war aside, the Kremlin does not officially acknowledge that this place is Putin's residence. However, let's keep it real, it probably is one of his many residences. The Heroes of Stalingrad is next on the list. This is a giant memorial complex dedicated to all of those who lost their lives during the Battle of Stalingrad, which is arguably the bloodiest battle in all of human history, and quite possibly the most important battle of World War II. See, the Germans had taken over much of the Eastern Soviet Union during Operation Barbarossa, and they knew that they could really stick it to the Soviets by taking over the oil and gas rich port of Baku on the Caspian Sea, but in order to get to Baku in what is now Azerbaijan, they needed to take over Stalingrad, which is now known as Volgograd. This was home to some of the heaviest fighting in the entire war, and immense human suffering, but the Soviets managed to pull it off. Surround one of the German divisions, or more accurately, multiple German divisions, and kick them out. And this would eventually lead to a turning point in the Eastern Front, in which the Nazis would be on the back end. Now let's look at Kazakhstan. And no, I'm not gonna reference Borat. After all, Borat's hometown was actually filmed in Romania. Instead, I'm gonna look at the Cosmodrome, which was essentially the Soviet and later Russian space station. After all, the Soviets had pioneered space travel, first starting off with Sputnik, the first satellite, and then putting the first man, woman, and dog into space. Don't look at what happened to that dog, it's rather depressing. Nonetheless, while the Americans eventually won the race to the moon, the Soviets still pioneered the field. And by and large, to this day, given the end of the shuttle space program, many astronauts and cosmonauts from around the world still use this area, or more accurately, this station, to travel into the heavens. What's quite fascinating is despite the grievances between the West and Russia here on Earth, they by and large tend to get along in space. And on that positive note, I will end this video. In my next video, we will be covering the gems of Google Earth in the Middle East and North Africa. Stay tuned.